Yo, what's good? My name's Kang like Kangaroo. I'm a Canadian that's currently living and working in Seattle as a software engineer. And on this channel, we talk about tips and tricks that people can take advantage of in order to reach fire faster. In this video, I'm going to be telling you the truth between software engineering in the US and software engineering in Canada. I'm coming up on my 2-year anniversary of working in the States. And while my average screen time on Blind is 3 hours a day, I have never worked a full-time job in Canada aside from my 16 months worth of internship. So take what I say right here with a big grain of salt. The USA, specifically in those big tech hubs, has a much more robust and competitive job market when comparing it to Canada. Because of this more competitive job market, you'll probably have better career growth, also probably going to get better career opportunities, and you'll also probably get better perks. And the biggest one in my opinion is the money, but I'll go into detail on that one a little bit later. But this competitiveness of the US job market is a double-edged sword in my opinion. On one side, this market is driving up salaries and perks, but on the flip side, the US is the big leagues. And since remote work is more of a thing now, you're not only competing with people in your city, people in your state, but people from other countries as well. The majority of people that are coming to the States to work are probably going to be on a visa, and that has its own list of downsides. Like you can't vote, you can't have any extra side income. If you come with your wife and kids, they can't work. And if you get fired from your job, you have to leave the country within 60 days unless you find another company that was willing to sponsor you. And the last con, which I think is a pretty big one that not a lot of people talk about, is that you're uprooting your life and moving to a different country. And this isn't like the end-all list of pros and cons for moving. Like I could literally go all day on this. But one point that I really want to talk about is the money. The money in the USA is so much better. Now there are some circumstances where you'll come out even or maybe even a little bit ahead if you had stayed in Canada. But I think in the vast majority of situations, if you're moving to the US, you're getting a bump in your total compensation. And I know when I say this, a lot of people are immediately going to think about cost of living, be like, oh, cost of living, blah, 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 is so high in all these cities. Shut up and look at this. This is the median annualized price of a 1-bedroom apartment versus the median entry-level total compensation for what I consider the biggest tech hubs in Canada and the US. Here I've listed Seattle, San Francisco, New York, Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto. And we can debate on which cities we should consider tech hubs, but let's just take a look at the data really quick. So for this data, I'm using Levels FYI for the salary information and Zumper for the median price of a 1-bedroom apartment, and I just multiply that 12 for the annualized cost. I'm going to be using the rent cost as a generalization of the cost of living because I think at this income, the other day-to-day expenses like groceries, transportations, and eating out is pretty similar across each city, and in my opinion, pretty negligible when you're comparing it to rent. Now taking the TC and comparing it to the rent, we can see that we're coming out ahead in every single US tech hub when compared to Canada. And this gap in pay gets even bigger when you get to higher levels of software engineering like SDE2 or even a senior engineer. And of course, the data is very generalized. I didn't use every single city. And like I said, I used like a random website to find this median rent data. On top of that, everyone that's watching right now is going to have very separate situations. But I think in general, we can say that the US gives a much better deal when it comes to compensation. But let's be real, if you're watching this video, you probably already knew that. But what you probably didn't know is the truth about moving to America. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. And I know in school, at least Canadian school, we used to say this a lot. It's Cali or bust. But in reality, sometimes it's Cali and then you still bust. I think a lot of people really gloss over the difficulties of leaving your home, your community, and your family to move to a different country. When I first moved to Seattle, I had a couple of friends that moved with me at the same time. And if it weren't for them, I think between finding friends, which let's be honest is kind of difficult, and missing my family every single day, I probably would have been depressed. I was feeling lonely, homesick, and low-key disgusted with myself that I would put myself through all these negative emotions just for more money on my paycheck. Looking back, the money and the career growth in America was definitely worth it for me, and I don't regret my decision on moving. I'm getting great experience, I have amazing mentors, and I'm growing in a lot of ways outside of my career that I don't think I would have been able to do if I had just stayed at home the whole entire time. But let's be honest here, software engineering is not my vocation. In reality, I don't think that's the case for most people either. What living in the US does, it gives me more money and better experience, which therefore accelerates my career and my path to fire, which is what is actually important to me. Now, I think the main idea that I'm trying to say in this video is that you have to determine what is important to you because everyone is different and everyone is on different paths. Now, at this point of the video, if you're Canadian, you're like, oh, I don't want to move to the US, you're probably thinking to yourself that you're basically like, out of luck for finding a good job. Oh, not necessarily. Since remote work is becoming a bigger thing, salary bands in Canada are slowly rising up and American companies are starting to create bigger presences in Canada. Another option that you could do if you wanted to stay in Canada is work at a startup in the US. And that might sound a little bit weird, but stick with me. I personally know people who have worked in smaller startups, think less than 100 people, and have remained in Canada while still be getting paid USD. So what these startups do is that they contract their, payroll services to a third-party company. The one that I'm familiar with is called Deal. They're able to convert the US salary one-to-one to Canadian. Okay, so let's say, for example, my friend works at one of these companies and they pay like 150K USD. What this third party will do is they'll take that 150K and convert it to whatever that is in Canadian. Let's say like It's probably close to 200K Canadian. And if you ask me, that's a pretty good deal. Now, as for finding these companies, to be honest, I'm not really sure. I've linked a GitHub page where someone has curated a list of 100% remote companies. So I think that'd be a good place to start. Well-Found is another option you can probably take a look at. And if anyone else has some more information, please leave it down in the comments so that, other people can see it. All right, so let's say at this point in the video, you've done some soul searching and you realize you really love red, white, and blue, you love guns, and you love eagles, and you want to move to America. Here's my advice. You're going to need two things, a job and a visa. The job is going to be the hard part and the visa is going to be the easy part. And when I say easy, I mean relatively easy. From what I've seen, most employers will use a TN visa to sponsor their traditional software engineers to the US. And from what I understand, this TN visa is cheaper and easier to file than something like the H-1B visa, for example. Now I'm going to be making a whole nother video specifically just about visas. So make sure that you hit subscribe so you don't miss out on that one. Now, the hard part about getting to the US is actually finding a job because the market here is so much more competitive. In my opinion, the easiest way to get to the US is through a return internship offer. So here's my advice for all my Canadian friends in university right now. You might have a golden opportunity and you might not realize it. While it is true that you're competing against big brand name schools like MIT, Harvard, Stanford, I don't know the other ones, but pretend there was a bunch. You have an advantage even if you went to a relatively no-name school like I did, which was McMaster. This advantage is the ability to take 16 months worth of internships, which in Canada I think is pretty common. A lot of the people that I've met at work or just met in general have had like 2 internships, 3 max. On top of that, the common internship term in America is only 3 months. Having an extra month and potentially 2 or 3 more internships under your belt before you graduate is going to put you at a big advantage in my opinion. And since you have more internship terms, you have more opportunities to get into a company that will sponsor you or potentially even have multiple options when you graduate. I know that Waterloo and U of T have been the big dogs for a while, but smaller schools like Mac are on the come up. Mostly thanks to me and my boys, so you're welcome if you go to Mac. And let's say you have an offer and you're on the fence. Really make sure if this is the right decision for you. If you know you're gonna move and you're gonna be like miserable the whole entire time, then maybe this isn't the right choice for you. Like I said, the money is good, really good even, but money can't buy back time. And even though the money is better in the US, that doesn't mean that the money in Canada isn't good. You'll most likely have a very fulfilling life with a solid salary while living in Canada. And even though the salary is less, not everything in life is about money, which is funny coming from a guy with a personal finance YouTube channel. But if you're just like in your head and scared to make that jump, I think you just gotta do it. Before I moved, I was thinking a lot about if I was making the right decision. But my family, my friends, and my girlfriend really pushed me to do it. And looking back, I'm really happy that I did. But let's say that you move and you hate it. That's okay, you can just always move back. But what's important is that you tried. But if all you care about is money or the latest and greatest in tech, there's nowhere else you'd rather be than the US in my opinion. And speaking about money, if you're only trying to optimize for money, and I said only here, you should pick Seattle over SF. I know that Seattle gets a lot of hate because it rains here all the time, which is true, but the summers here are amazing. The transit's pretty good if you live on the train line, and the rent prices are way more affordable than they are in the Bay Area. Even though the salaries are a little bit lower here than they are in SF, you don't pay any state income tax, which in my opinion, way makes up for it. I've done the napkin math a couple times and I'm saving and investing way more here than I would have if I lived in SF. Another quick note about America and American cities. I've traveled the US a little bit. I live in Seattle, but I've visited LA, New York, and SF and the Bay Area in general. What I've seen in all these places except for New York is a big lack of diversity when comparing it to the GTA, which is where I'm from. And this is in terms of ethnic diversity, cultural diversity, and even like food diversity. For Seattle and SF particularly, everyone is kind of into the same things and all work in tech. Seattle specifically, everyone either works at Amazon or Microsoft. Another thing that I've noticed is that American cities are significantly dirtier than Canadian cities. Like I could walk down the street in Seattle and I can literally see human poop just on the ground for everyone to see. On top of that, I'm walking over broken bottles, broken needles, and broken crack pipes all the time. And I know Seattle isn't claiming to be the cleanest city, but you drive 3 hours north of Vancouver and it's significantly better. There's also a lot of homeless people in the big tech hubs, and I think it's important to acknowledge that our jobs plays a factor in the homelessness epidemic in the US. And before I moved, I was really scared from a safety standpoint. And while it is true that crime is higher here in the US, and I do feel significantly safer back home, it is kind of overblown and not as bad as they say it is online. With that being said, I did hear my first ever gunshot within the first 4 months living in Seattle, so that's just some food for thought. In terms of people, everyone that I've met here has been very nice. And oddly enough, I know a lot of Canadians that are currently living here. There is one weird thing that I've noticed about Americans, and is that they don't use their P's and Q's. So instead of saying you're welcome, they'll say things like, yep, which to me is like just a little bit weird. And this is not to say that Americans are mean or rude or anything, but maybe just that Canadians are overly polite. And honestly, I can go on and on literally all day, so I'll just stop it right here. I'll end my advice with this. If it were not for the money, you would probably be watching this video with the backdrop of the CN Tower behind me. But unfortunately, the reality is money is a significant factor. I remember looking at my return offer from Canada and my return offer from the States and just being blown away by the difference. And if you want to see the actual numbers for those offers, you can watch this video right here where I go over my salary progression from $11 an hour to $80 an hour.